Trump just had his arraignment in front of the judge in New York. This is after he was indicted for 34 counts of felony charges. Now, to go over this information very briefly, we have the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, who is his campaign was funded by someone who quite honestly wants to destroy the system in America. But just going into the objective details of this case, we have someone who found a case where the statute of limitations were up, and he decided to charge Trump, or he gave the responsibility to a grand jury. The grand jury indicted him. You go in front of the judge. The judge will comply with the grand jury's assessment and say, okay, we're charging you with 34 counts of X, Y, and Z. In this case, Trump had, his lawyer had paid off two people, and allegedly Trump had reimbursed his lawyer with funds of a similar amount that the lawyer had used to pay off these people. They signed an NDA. Now, it's a campaign violation if you use campaign funds to pay people off for personal matters. But there, again, this is a lot of speculation because you can make any type of justification for a legal expense. In this case, Alvin Bragg is saying that, well, Trump paid these people off to suppress information that would potentially sway him running his campaign in 2016. Trump could make any kind of claim to say, well, no, I wanted to hide the information from my family because of X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot of speculation and conjecture here, and it's all based off of intention. What is the intention here? Now, when we go to the felony charge is really, while you're committing this action, you had the intention of committing other crimes. So now the DA is elongating what objectively happened into a potential felony, because this would be a misdemeanor, and it would be a low-level felony. The 34 counts comes from, to paint an example, let's say you commit a crime. Let's say you used the mail involved with whatever crime it is, right? So now you have mail fraud. Let's say you committed a crime and there was money involved. You gave money to someone else. You were complicit in a crime. You were an accessory to a crime. You wired money to Johnny. Because you wired money and it was part of a crime, you get wire fraud. So the federal government has a good way of putting a lot of laws on the books that really supplement the initial crime to add more counts, to add more jail time. This gives them more leverage from a prosecution point of view, so that you're more likely to take a plea deal or work with them if there's, depending on the criminal case, work with them, take a plea deal, whatever the situation is. It puts a lot of leverage into the prosecution's hands. I would say this is largely unconstitutional to be able to add a bunch of counts that are totally separate from the crime, but just because you committed a crime, now everything else around the crime is also a criminal charge. That's largely unconstitutional. You charge a person based off the initial crime, the objective crime, and only the objective crimes. You don't add a bunch of other things to it. Now, in some cases, just like any kind of authoritarian leadership, you can have a RICO law, like racketeering, where racketeering is largely unconstitutional, the law itself, to criminally charge someone with RICO. But it's essentially like saying, well, you have a bunch of different criminal acts going on, so we're also going to throw racketeering, another charge. It's basically expanding the amount of charges that you can throw onto someone. Can you take care of the mafia and put them away for a longer period of time with accessory counts? Yes. But it can also be used against innocent people for political prosecution situations. In this instance, if we look at the facts, the objective information, this is largely a prosecution of the political, right? This is political theater. If someone is going to do wrong, whether they're on the left or the right, we want to hold the same standard using the Constitution and using all the laws that derive its power from the Constitution, or their power from the Constitution. If we're prosecuting people because they're a political opponent, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're on the right, you're on the left, you're in the middle, you're a libertarian, you're a fascist. It doesn't really matter. You're a socialist, you're a Democrat. It doesn't matter. If you're using your power to go after your opponents, your political opponents, we are no different than any other third world country, not even third world country, any other country in general. Now, typically, America has been just as dirty, if not dirtier, than a lot of other countries, but we've done it in a covert manner, and we've kept it away from the domestic population. Now we're seeing a change of events where there is so much power in this current power structure, this political regime that we have right now, where they see an obstacle. In this case, Trump is the obstacle, and it's not really about Trump, okay? You could replace Trump with JFK. Any person, let's use JFK for example. JFK, before he got JFK'd, was exposing what was going on behind the scenes with the intelligence agencies. He wanted to defund them, he wanted to go after them, he wanted to shrink them. In many cases, he wanted to abolish them in general because there were a bunch of federal agencies that were coming about underneath him, and he had no power to control them, but he thought he did. Unfortunately, and due to multiple different variables, JFK was JFK'd, and we know the official report, the Warren Commission, largely has been debunked even now. But a lot of people, and even a good majority of the population, will agree that, hey, the JFK situation, there's a lot of sketchy things there. If people actually look into it, the evidence does not corroborate or match with what the Warren Commission was purporting. There's actually a lot of other evidence tying the JFK situation to other interests, other parties. And so this is no different when you have an obstacle, it doesn't matter who it is, and they're interfering with the national security state. They're interfering with the status quo of the political regime, or what the establishment wants. We always talk about the establishment. There are Republicans and Democrats on the establishment. So no matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, most of the time, for the majority of those people who are in those parties, you're going to go towards the establishment. I'm mainly referring to people in Congress because those are the people who we elect. And so whether you vote for a Republican or a Democrat, I will say there are more Democrats who are part of the establishment than in the Republican Party, but a large majority of them are still part of the establishment. So the old saying is, Republicans are like Democrats, but instead of going towards the agenda at 100 miles an hour, they're going towards the agenda at 50 miles per hour. So they're still heading towards the same direction, just at a slower pace. An example of this is, just to give a very trivial example, well, it's important, but it's trivial in the grand scheme of things. Democrats will come, they'll propose a bill, we need to pass 10 gun laws. Republicans will come in, and maybe you have the minority of the Republicans who are part of this committee. They'll say, well, look, the Constitution says shall not be infringed, so Congress can't make any law. You want to propose 10, we can't pass any laws against the Second Amendment. And Democrats will push and push. Eventually, the end result is they're compromising on passing 4 gun laws. So you'll have Republicans compromise with the 10, and so you get 4 gun laws that are passed. You compound that over time, you have a bunch of gun laws. Now we have over 20,000 gun laws on the books. And clearly the Constitution says shall not be infringed. There's good reason for that, so that we're not exploited from we the people. Yes, there's gun crime, but the amount of damage that individuals, private citizens, do to each other is not even comparable to what governments have historically and currently do to its own people. That's why we have the Second Amendment, to serve as a deterrent, right now mainly to serve as a way to ensure due process. Otherwise, cops would just barge in your home, take you away, no due process, you're charged for X, Y, and Z crime, whether it's legitimate or not, and you don't have any recourse to it. So back onto this topic, we are now seeing our nation turn into a banana republic where we have precedent of taking a former president, a former sitting president, and charging him with crimes, impeaching him twice. Now, we can have a whole controversy over whether or not it's reasonable or just. And to that occasion, I would say there have been presidents who have done much worse than this president. And it's not a justification. It's a relative. We're looking at this in relative terms. Like campaign violation, for example. We have seen Obama and Hillary Clinton violate campaign finance laws. They had to pay fines, civil fines, but there's no criminal action. So just the fact that we're taking this guy and there's criminal action, this is now political prosecution, because the same standard, if we're using the relative metric, the same standard is not being applied to all the people who are in that category. I'm not saying that these people are above the law or anything of the sort. In fact, if we had a president who was committing corruption and selling out the interests of America, short-term interests of America, so that he and his family could benefit, but really long-term it puts us, the private citizens, at stake. Let's say the family or the president, whether he was vice president or president, he was doing deals with China, deals with Ukraine. He had his family members do deals with Ukraine, deals with China, and in return, China had more power and leverage over the American people. That would be treason. And there's a certain price to pay for treason. That is a crime at the highest level. That should be accounted for. And we have had presidents who have done that. They've sold out the interests of America. They have committed treason, and nothing was done to them. I believe there was Ulysses Grant. He was arrested for speeding in a horse buggy. This was over 150 years ago. That was the last time a president was arrested for something. I know in this instance, we didn't actually see cuffs on Trump, but this is akin to that, where we're living in a banana republic. If we go to China or Russia, for example, I'm comparing them with us right now because they're also world superpowers. They go after their political opponents. They allegedly poison them. That's more so Russia. China, you just squash them out. You create a barrier to where people can't even compete. That's why they have all these systems in place using technology, so that if you say something that's negative against the Communist Party, the CCP, or whatever ruling party is in place, they will. You have jail time, you have detainment, You don't really have any rights in those countries. They are, well, China mostly. It's implementing capitalistic policies so that their middle class can rise up, because ultimately they want leverage over the world. But they still have an authoritarian system. So yes, you have capitalism, you have a higher standard of living, but you're sacrificing your rights. You don't have any rights. The ruling party of Xi and all of his people, they want to control the population. They want dominion over law and order. And they don't want anyone to challenge that. In America, it's no different. People are people. Humans are innate with the idea of, I want to consolidate power and I want to keep that power. I don't want anyone to take away my power. Now, there are people who are more virtuous than others, right? But in all odds, people are self-interested. So if you go to the tops of hierarchies, the vast majority of people will want to concentrate power with themselves and hold on to that power. And they will create barriers and restrictions, and they will even go after their political opponents, like we're seeing right now, where we have certain DAs and we have certain attorney generals who, this attorney general of New York, before she even ran for attorney general, said, I'm going to go after this person. Already right off the bat saying, I'm going to politically prosecute someone. I don't have any reason to other than bias. I don't have any casework or case law in front of me. I don't have anything in front of me, but I'm running and I'm going to go after this person. This is called political prosecution. You swore an oath to the Constitution, hopefully, if you're going to be in an elected position in the United States, and you are betraying the Constitution. You're committing treason by going against the Constitution. And like I said, there's a heavy punishment for treason. We no longer punish people with that punishment for treason, but there's a reason why treason is such a dirty word. There's a reason why treason was taken so seriously even just 100 years ago, because you're going against the interests of the people. You're going against the interests of the founding documents that we have that even gave you the ability to be in this position. You're going against the opportunity that was afforded in front of you. And you're eroding and degrading the current system in such a way that, sure, you may benefit short term, but you're putting this whole nation at risk. Because if you compound all these people here, the DAs here, the AGs here, the vice presidents here, the presidents there, over time, they're degrading the system. This is not good for our country. I mean, at a certain point, you have I understand civilizations come and go, empires rise and they fall, and we're seeing the degradation, the decline of the American empire. It's a sad state to understand. There are other empires that still exist, like the British Empire still exists. It's just England now, and these people are, I would say, largely fine. Like, of course, they have a slightly lower standard of living. It's a little bit harder to earn a wage, a little bit harder to open up a business and maintain the business. Those are the cons of not being the world superpower. Those are the cons of not being the number one empire in the world. You will have Russia or China, most likely China, who will come in. They've already culturally subverted our nation, and they're still doing it. But they'll come in overtly after a period of time. Or rather, they will have more power, and America will have to submit to certain policies to work with China. And because China does not care about even their own people's individual rights, they definitely won't care about America's individual rights, like us as private citizens. So that's the only thing that I personally am very concerned about, because in these other countries, they can manipulate the standard of living a little bit. It's not even comparable to America, because here in America, you can build a business and the next year, I'm not saying it'll happen in the next year, but in a year, you can become a multimillionaire and have a lot of things going for you. You could dramatically change your lifestyle. You can dramatically help a lot of people. And a lot of other nations, you can't really do that because, like I said before, there are barriers to entry, and there are just general barriers where you can't even enter because it's that much hard. There's no meritocratic system in these other nations. But when you have other nations come in, and we are the only empire ever that has had individual rights. We're the only empire that has freedom of speech. We're the only empire that has the right to bear arms. I believe Switzerland has that to an extent, but the only empire to have rights of these kind. And it took us, I mean, I could say arguably since the beginning of civilization, but let's just say since the Magna Carta, and then you escalate that, so a few hundreds of years to build up to the situation where we have individual rights as a private citizen. That gives us power to contrast the power with centralized authority. And these other nations, centralized authority has the utmost power. If you go against the centralized authority in any situation, any type of way, they can shut you down. Here, they're already starting to shut us down, whether it's through proxy, through different platforms and companies, or just directly, because they have so much power. They don't care if they do it overtly. They know that the population is not going to come together and push back in any kind of way. And they're also, these people at the top of these hierarchies, because they want to ensure their position, they're implementing different strategies to weaken the population so that you can't even push back even if you wanted to, even if you were awakened or aware. So, for example, lowering testosterone. We can go back within the few decades, testosterone is dramatically declining. Why is that important? Testosterone gives us the ability for effort. makes effort feel good. It surges our dopamine when we take action. We feel reward. We increase our serotonin, so we feel more confident. I'm trying to be delicate and polite here, but with testosterone, you have the young males who actually stand up for a cause. And that's what the people at the tops of hierarchies don't want. So they try to suppress that. We're being fed carbs, for example, all these processed foods that create obesity. They create overweight people. People are sluggish. People are mentally sluggish. People are physically sluggish. And now you have a population that is much easier to control. So there's many other attributes and variables that contribute to that. Like you could have a bunch of degenerate entertainment where people are caring about the Kardashians instead of the political scenes of what's going on behind the curtain in this country. This is all by design to an extent. We can make a case that not every single thing is by design, but it is definitely leveraged to people's interests. And if people all want the same thing, generally speaking, let's say 98% of people want power, wealth, influence, status, and that's their interest, well, they'll align with other people, other groups, who will put those interests as a priority and take action against who? The population, because they want to serve their interests. So we have to be very aware that political prosecution is real. And again, no matter if you're on the left or the right, it doesn't matter if you're Trump, it doesn't matter if you're Biden, we need to hold the same standard. This sets very bad precedent for the President of the United States to be indicted, to be charged, to be facing, I think it's over 130 years of jail time because of, you add up all the counts, plus their felonies, all that. This is very bad precedent. This means now for the future stake that in the United States of America, we are the same as the Banana Republic countries, where we will have leaders who go in and they will prosecute political leaders so they can't go against them. They can't compete against them. They want to remove competition. If we go back to the Roman Empire, there was a period in the Roman Empire where all the emperors would be assassinated almost immediately. When I say that, a few months to a few years. And the new emperor would come in and think everything's going to be all right. And then he would get assassinated. And this would just happen over and over and over again. It's almost like no one realized that, there's such a concentration of power here that I'm a target. And if I do this to my opponent, what makes me think that the next opponent is not going to do it to me? It's like people are not thinking. They just want the short-term victory, but they're not thinking long-term. This long-term game is a strategic game, and most people are not strategic. So thus you have the crumbling of society, and that is something we can fix, but it's on the lines.